Is it on now? Nutsack. Oh, that'll make an interesting video.
My sister was like,
Feel free to yell at somebody.
Anyone else is feeling like how much you like Billy had money too, but it was because my grandma got you make him any teddy bears. Like, I didn't know anything of it, so I was giving him my teddy bears, and Bill's mom walked in and she was like, you can't have one. So we were like, oh, he didn't really watch it. I didn't know what it was. Like that place is so proud of you. Like walked out to the beehive, stuck our arm in there. I done that. I think that's what you call my
I didn't leave until 7. I was like hot. When I dropped it off, I'd also just
Did you get your hair done? It looks great.
I'm lucky to be here. Getting ready for the wedding prepared?
No.
She hates it. Yeah.
How'd you do it?
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Oshke, I was studying microbiology and you have to write about this.
Excellent.
That's completely relevant to that was just to show you about like alpha beta the only thing, well, you had artists, so it was the only thing. So what time was it? We did it on blood pressure, so infection,
Why?
Look at the stars from my
Sorry, can I look at what?
the startings of my paper, like the beginning and all of me trying to write my pregnancies and stuff like computer will
I
take
can
like
do
more
that.
than because I don't want you to give me a surprise ending. You know,
I like
I'd
giving,
rather,
I like giving
yeah,
surprises.
I'd like to know about this, like the fires that I didn't
Sometimes it's just an eye opener. It's an awakener.
why do you want to give somebody an F?
I don't give F. People deserve them.
I'm not trying to get it added on.
You know how you just turn off in 20 minutes.
You can turn it on anytime if you're done.
Can we turn it into
Yeah, I prefer it because otherwise I've got 42 papers to grade in about 3 days. The sooner the better. Allison, you sent me a little email.
Do you want me to print that and give you
I tell you, it would be easier if you did print it and give it to me because we're talking about the papers here. Because sometimes people send me stuff and sometimes it arrives and I can't open it for whatever. I had a problem with that last semester with 3 or 4 people. Just the thing wouldn't open. And so it's past due date and I'm emailing them and they've gone. You know, they took some trip somewhere and I still don't have a paper and it's 3 weeks after the course is over because it wouldn't open. So I'd prefer they give me a hard copy. Thank you very much. You can turn in your paper anytime. As soon as you're done, you've done your identification. So it makes no difference. And if you're done with lab at that point, then you're done for the semester. Okay, I'll work with you. What do you think? Or you air in your armpit?
Not your arm, but your leg, when you're ready to.
I'm ready.
Okay, so if we do turn it in early, say like the end of this week.
Yeah.
We have it graded by.
I'll grade it within 3-4 days. Yeah, there's a lot going on right now.
So what they're saying,
Show and tell.
this is such a good.
Only one more lecture after today. What do you got?
So I think
Ebola virus, still a major problem.
Currently, the death toll is 125.
Yeah, that's about right, and it's spreading. So now it just keeps showing up in little pockets, and that's what's got everybody mystified, is why it's, hold on, why it's spotting all over the place. Yeah, there's all kinds of speculation, and what are they trying to get back to? Yeah, the index case.
They apparently traced it to a taxi driver, a sick guy.
Everybody listening here?
But apparently, from what I was reading, this taxi driver drove a sick guy to a hospital in a different, like, over the border because the hospital was better.
Yeah.
And that patient that he drove was, I think, the first confirmed case that they could find.
Yeah.
They haven't been able to link it back further than that.
And all that rider in the cab would have to do would be to give money to the taxi cab driver because the virus stays alive on services. And then that driver then takes that paper money and gives it change to somebody else and so on and so on and so on.
Wow, that is so scary.
It is. And it's bound to happen that we're going to end up with either that virus or a virus just like it that finally makes its way out of Africa, as it were, and spreads worldwide.
I do have a question. Last I had heard, they supposedly thought they had found a vector for the Ebola virus. Have they figured out where it
No,
came from?
there's still speculation on that.
Okay.
They still keep talking about fruit bats, but the problem is last that I read, is that no one has isolated the virus from a fruit bat yet.
Because that's what I was trying to figure
Yeah.
out, because it kept saying something about bats and animals, and I kept reading and trying to dig a little bit deeper, but
Yeah.
you can only go so far with it.
I speculate that it's probably an insect. But well, who knows? Who knows? Remember the earthquake that hit Haiti? Okay. How many years ago was that?
You said 3?
That was 3 or 4 years ago. I can't
Yeah.
remember. You can recall that the devastation that occurred there in that part of the world, in that island, and all the money that was collected. I mean, billions upon billions of dollars. Everybody was sending in money to help rebuild the country. The question is, where did all that money go? Because the
Somebody
country
else.
is still pretty much in the same boat that it was 2 months after the earthquake hit. But worse upon worse was the fact that you can recall when the UN came in to help just stabilize, get people in tents, potable water, and all that kind of stuff. A group brought in cholera with them. And they're still fighting that cholera epidemic. And I'm not going to read it, it's a long article, but so United Nations has yet to raise the $5 million necessary to vaccinate the 600,000 vulnerable people right away. As a result, the rainy season looms and waterborne illnesses like cholera loom, let alone the $2 billion that it promised to raise from rich countries to build Haiti's waters. Anyway, that $2 billion that went into Haiti to rebuild their water supply system and make sure they had potable water is somehow gone. And the water system has not been upgraded, and they don't have treated water. It's exactly what it is. It's corruption again. Somebody says, okay, you're in charge here of building the water supply. We're going to give you, put this in your account, and that person, then UN leaves, and they go, this looks like a trip around the world. So it's kind of a sad state of affairs, but the number of people, I was looking for the number of people who have died there, and it's buried in here somewhere. But the sad thing is that, yeah, they're still using a cholera cot. That's amazing. Cholera, which we'll talk about that actually next week. We talked about curve form. It's such uncontrollable diarrhea that they use what they call a cholera cot, which is just a regular cot. You know what a cot is, but it has a hole in the middle. They put a bucket underneath because it's uncontrollable diarrhea, and they've been using that for hundreds of years. And they still, you see the pictures right there. They're still using cholera cots. So amazing. So it's one of those situations where people got their emotions caught up in what was happening down there, sent loads of money. The money went God knows where. But the poor people down there still haven't benefited from all of those billions. So sad state of affairs. Adage, trust no one.
That's right.
Okay. Go back to our sheet. As a gentle reminder, you're very professional today, Steve. Thank you. Yeah.
I do as well.
Thank you very much. And we're dealing with gram-negative rods. Huge group. Remember that? Huge group. And how did we break down that large group? It was based on what? We broke it down into 3 groups of organisms based on respiratory gas requirements. Were they aerobes? Were they facultative anaerobes? Were they anaerobes? And so then I gave you this sheet to help you kind of organize your head out of all of that. And my voice was bad last week, and I said we're going to jump into the facultative anaerobes. And what we took a look at there was salmonella, and we saw the video on typhoid Mary and all of that. So let's just go back to that group, the facultative anaerobes. Notice the family name there. Good morning. So you came in so quietly. Thank you. You did a great job. But in Salmonella, we got Salmonella typhi, Salmonella cholera suis, Salmonella enteritis. We have a real problem with this genus. Even though obviously typhoid, typhi mentions typhoid out of all of that. And you saw the whole video with that, and I don't have to repeat that particular organism. But there is a huge debate that goes on in terms of what to do with all of these strains of cholera, or of salmonella. And with the term we use then are serotypes, as opposed to using species within the genus. Serotype, any idea what that might mean? So instead of using species names for the most part, most microbiologists today use serotypes. And those are numbers. 01643, something like that. Sero reminds you of what? Serum. And you know in serum you have antibodies. And so based on what kind of antibodies are elicited by a given strain of salmonella, we refer to that as the serotype. And there are hundreds. There are hundreds. So obviously it must mean that this particular genus mutates with some frequency. And we have all of these strains. And they go from the extreme case of typhoid, which you saw in poor Mary Matlin over there, and all that stuff, where people can die from that, to we go to other strains over here that give us food problems. Now, let's just talk about them for just a second, because everybody in this room has had some kind of salmonellosis in their life, if not multiple cases of it. And you remember the little bug we talked about before, which we said everybody's had too, which was Staphylococcus aureus. And Staphylococcus aureus brought about what? Food poisoning, because it produced a toxin. Well, in this particular case with salmonella, it produces something called food infection. Because here you get the live organism in the rotten food that you're eating, and in turn, the organism attaches to the walls of your intestine and virtually digests away those walls. It attacks you outright. No toxins involved. So salmonella that gives us food infection, then very common. Self-limiting, 2 to 3 days. God bless you. Most people say what? They've had the flu again, some kind of intestinal flu. Although there is a major intestinal flu going around right now in Greater Cincinnati. It's a norovirus that's giving a lot of people problems. So here we find a slightly different source of the problem. What kind of foods do you look out for?
You said last week something about, you talked about fettuccine alfredo.
Yeah, with Staph aureus.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually processed meats and that kind of thing again. I don't know if you remember the little boy on the west side 4 or 5 years ago died from, God bless you. You pinch your nose like that, you're going to blow your ears or your brains out through your ears. They just like that. Who died from a from a salmonella infection that he got from his iguana. Because reptiles, we know reptiles carry salmonella on them as well. And it was one of those serotypes because most of the time you just kind of get sick, feel lousy for a couple of days, you have the trots, you vomit, you have a low-grade fever and all of that. But this kid died from that. For that reason, when I was a kid, you could buy these turtles, little turtles, and they were raised in these turtle farms in Florida. And they gave them away at you went to the fair or something like that, or the school, May fake type of thing, and you'd come home with a little turtle. Well, those things were, and they lived for about a week, and you find them floating belly up. Yeah, it felt bad for them, but they were so badly infected, infested as it were, with salmonella that they're not allowed to sell them anymore. So a whole bunch. This is just a wide group, and enough said on that. So let's take a look back at our sheet. And let's go work at the top of that family. Remember, we said we'll come back to the aerobes. We're working in the facultative anaerobes. Well, E. coli. What can we say about E. coli? Gastrointestinal stuff as well? Absolutely. In this hospital, pretty much the #1 cause for what? UTIs. Because contaminated Foley. So it's typically an organism that doesn't produce any harm for us, but from every once in a while, what happens? It gets in the wrong spot, such as up the urethra, and it causes major problems. Major part of our flora in our colon, large intestine. And this symbiotic relationship, we know all about that, right? It provides certain vitamin K and some vitamin B complexes and things like that. It provides bulk to your feces and all of that. So we've got this friendly organism, but it again has its serotypes that show up from time to time that cause problems. So the UTI that you got because somebody had contaminated the Foley before they inserted it was still this old strain of E. coli that's found in your colon. It just found a new place to be. But what was the scoop with the Jack-in-the-Box E. coli? Going back about 10, 12 years ago. It's interesting to see Jack-in-the-Box those fast food joints showing up around here now again. Remember with the 0157? Does that ring a bell for anybody? E. coli 0157, that serotype?
There was a big E. coli outbreak that had to do with spinach.
Okay, and hold on to that one because we'll go there as well. But what happened was undercooked hamburgers, fast food place, and a bunch of people got sick. A couple of people died, and it's referred to as entero. I can never spell this. Hemorrhagic, and I think that's spelled incorrectly because I think there are 2 R's. Help me out, Steve.
It's got 2 R's and an H.
Yeah, sometimes they put the H in it, which is the British spelling. And where was the H here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Look it up. But 0157 serotype, enterohemorrhagic. Take the word apart. Entero obviously meaning in your intestine somewhere, and hemorrhagic causing you to hemorrhage, cause bleeding of the bowel lining, those simple columnar epithelial cells that line your small and large intestine. And what did people die from? Interestingly enough, they died from acute glomerulonephritis, kidney failure. So even though they had bloody stool and all the symptoms that went with that, they ended up dying from kidney failure. Nephrons clogged with the antibody that was trying to get rid of the organism that was there. So we went from undercooked hamburger from meat, and then the question is, well, wait a minute, how did that meat get contaminated? And if you can recall, it went back to a slaughterhouse and meat processing plant in Kansas. And the question was, okay, how does E. coli get in the middle of my hamburger? Well, what it went back to is when they put the animal down, and the animal plops down there, and then they grab it by the back leg and they haul the thing up, and then they get a skinner who skins the thing out real quick. And then you gut the thing out and all of that stuff, and then just plop the stuff on the floor. But what typically happens is obviously you're going to get some fecal material. Usually they tie off the rectum, and they tie off just like gutting a deer, and you're tying off the top of the stomach out of this thing, and you take that pluck and you pull it out and just plop it. But feces still gets on the floor. And so we got this part of the slaughterhouse where all of that kind of stuff is done, and then the meat travels into another room. But every once in a while, and the guy, with his little wellies on, who's just walked through all the hort or the cow crap, comes into this room, and this carcass slips off the hook and flops on the floor, fecally contaminated. They pick it up, hang it up there again, and then they go ahead and cut the whole thing up, and they grind up all this chuck and stuff like that, which now had E. coli on the outside, which is now embedded within the hamburger. So if you undercook, what you leave are these organisms still very much alive. And then the question is, well, how do you get around ordering rare steak, which is what I like? Give me a steak which is just barely warm on the inside, nice and thick, and just seared on the outside. Well, there are no E. coli inside, right? If there is going to be any E. coli contamination, it's going to be on the outside. If it's seared well, you've killed off all those organisms. So a rare steak doesn't cause a problem. But then again, what has happened lately is there has been a new method of tenderizing meat, where they use these almost needle-like projections that go into steak. And of course, what does that do? If there's any bacteria on the surface, those get carried and directly into the meat itself. So now it becomes a problem even in a restaurant to order a rare steak anymore, because you don't know if the meat has been processed in that way. I asked my butcher, and he assures me that his meat, which he gets the hindquart or something like that, and he cuts it all himself, that it hasn't been treated in that particular way. So I know my risk is down pretty much. Spinach, right?
Yeah.
California. What was the source of the E. coli in that one? A lot of people got sick from that.
Water. Somebody was somebody's taking a
the
dump.
spinach and the tomatoes? Because tomatoes were pooping in the.
Well, all of a sudden now it goes on to other. We have scallions, at the Mexican joint, Taco Bell. Goes on and on and on. These are all typically animal contaminants from somewhere. So you got a cattle field that's a couple of miles upwind, and the cow just drops, right? Plop, aerosol carried downwind. So it usually seems to be that kind of source, or contaminated irrigation water. Yeah.
Last night I was watching something on PBS, and they were or yesterday afternoon, and they were talking about most of the cattle is actually not like raised on a farm. They're kind of like processing these huge, they take them from young cows and they start grain feeding them. and they showed this processing plant, and it's like literally like 100 miles away, less than 100 miles away, you have all these cows. And they're never free range, so you don't have to free range anymore.
Yeah, it kind of depends on where you go. Or they sell them early, the cattle raiser sells them early, and they go to these large holding facilities. Yeah.
So if that's the case, they're all just a breeding factory. All these animals are literally just a breeding factory for salmonella and everything else, because you really don't know what they're doing with the corn that they're feeding them before they even get to them.
Well, and how do they deal with that?
They inject them with
Antibiotics, exactly right.
They're injecting them full of all this stuff. So really, it's not meat. We're just eating all these byproducts.
To a certain extent.
That's why everybody's babies are so big nowadays.
It depends upon where you get your meat.
Who's your butcher?
I use Jim Gullickson in Wyoming,
Oh,
Wyoming Meat Market.
my boyfriend's father.
Other sources, though, of E. coli, and everybody in this room has also had E. coli food poisoning. Pick it up from, oftentimes what they call traveler's diarrhea is usually E. coli. Usually E. coli. It could be other bugs as well. And we've kind of joked about this before. So you decide to go to Cancun. Somebody says, you know, I'm getting married in Cancun, and you have to all come down. So everybody goes down there. You have to pay out of your nose and money you can't afford because somebody wants to get married on the beach.
Right.
Shoot them, you know, shoot them. But anyway, so you have to spend all this money to go down, and you figure, while I'm down in Cancun, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to visit the sites. I'll go to the Mayan ruins. I'll do this, that, and so and so. And we talked about this story before. So you go to the little taco stand on the corner, and where's the lettuce come from? It's the guy picked in his backyard, but he fertilized it with the feces from his family because they just have an outhouse. But he composts his family's feces from time to time, and he uses great fertilizer. You know, you get on the plane, you're on your way home from the wedding, and all of a sudden you start to gurgle. And no matter what size the pen you got on, it ain't gonna hold this. And it's called traveler's diarrhea. Again, self-limiting. You have it 2 to 3 days, same scenario, and we live through it. And everybody in this room has had E. coli poisoning as well. So it's not uncommon. So we go from the extreme, which will kill you, to mild cases, to UTIs and all that kind of crap. Okay, which other ones do we want to talk about here? We're not going to do them all. Let's mention Proteus. See the genus Proteus under this facultative anaerobes? And in that genus, Proteus, there are a couple of species. Vulgaris is probably the most common. Vulgaris, anybody know what that means? To be vulgar?
Common?
Yeah, it's just common. So the implication is that this particular little rod is very common, and it is. Oftentimes it's also associated as a nosocomial infection in a hospital, UTI. So E. coli, perhaps the most common one, but oftentimes you come up with Proteus. Your patient's got a Proteus infection. And the question is, how do you know that? And one of the telltale signs that your patient's got a UTI with Proteus is that you have a basic urine, an alkaline urine. Explain why. So urine you usually expect to be slightly mildly acidic, correct? So now the urine has changed pH. The pH has gone up. You oftentimes don't even have to send it down to the lab to determine what kind of antimicrobial you want, because that pH is going to give it away right off the bat. E. coli infection doesn't change the pH, but Proteus will.
Is it because of the fermentation?
Nope. Good guess. It's because this organism is not an acidophile, doesn't like to live in an acidic environment. So while it's invading the walls of the bladder, there's the old bladder here. How many openings are there in the bladder?
3.
3, thank you. With a little flap on them, right? The ureters coming down. Is that it invades the wall of the bladder and it forming a biofilm. And what it secretes is then an alkaline compound around itself to keep from being degraded by the acids of the urine. So in turn, then, what happens while you've got this whole biofilm growing here and irritating the bowel, or irritating the bladder and all of that, is that it drops the pH. It raises the pH to protect itself. So it's dumping out all of these buffers initially, and then finally an alkaline type of a solution, so that the urine then goes from acidic to basic. And that's just a telltale sign that you've got a Proteus infection. And lots of patients do. It's not uncommon at all. Shigella. Shigellosis. Heard the word? Every once in a while there's an outbreak of Shigella. And notice the kind of names that go with the species there. Dysenteriae. Dysentery sounds like dysentery. And anytime you hear the word dysentery, in fact, the organism causes no matter how many, again, serotypes there are of that one, what are the symptoms? Dysentery, you think of right away what? Diarrhea, massive vomiting, all the stuff that goes with that. So you begin to see a trend, don't you? That this group, this Enterobacteriaceae, when they get out of control in the colon, they cause major problems. And yet, to a certain extent, many of them are there all the time. I could find Salmonella in everybody's stool in this room right now. I could probably find Shigella in about half of you. Obviously, I'm going to find E. coli in everybody's stool. So what all of a sudden makes this organism become a dysentery-causing bug? Disruption of normal flora, for whatever reason, or intake of a whole bunch of the new bug, and then you end up with that. And what do we call this? Where all of a sudden you have enough organisms to cause disease.
Inoculation dose.
Close, you're darn close. Infectious dose. The infectious dose. You reach that infectious dose. And again, sometimes that can be brought on by antibiotics that you're taking that can clean out some other organism, and because everybody's competing for food in your colon right now. So a variety of ways in which the whole infection can set up. Bacillary dysentery is what we commonly associate with it. And it's the same scenario that we saw with Salmonella. It causes infection. The organism actually invades the wall of the small and large intestine and causes significant damage. And it's a sneaky little bug. And just to kind of show you, let's say this is the lumen of your colon, and you've got these nice columnar epithelial cells lining that. And you get this little rod of Shigella, which attaches to the surface. And again, how is it going to attach? It's looking for what? Some receptor that your cell has got used for some other purpose, and it simply fits, and it irritates the cell, and what does the host cell do? Endocytosis. So now it actually brings the organism in, and normally what would happen if you endocytosed a pathogen on your surface?
Break it down.
Yes. So what normally happens is this. Here's the big cell. This is your columnar epithelial cell. These little rods got stuck here. We endocytosed them, brought them inside, and normally what happens? There is a peroxisome or a lysosome over here containing lysozyme or peroxides, and we use this actin-myosin sliding filament thing that pulls this over to form a phagolysosome. Any clue what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And as we pulled this one over, it would join and normally do what then? Dump its enzymes in there to kill the bacteria.
Right.
But what Shigella and even Salmonella to a large extent is capable of doing is blocking this actin-myosin fibril formation. So what happens is now you've got this phagosome which contains bacteria which have not been destroyed because we couldn't bring over this this lysing vacuole, which contained all these great enzymes. These little bugs then reproduce to beat the band, and the immune system hasn't seen it yet, right? Because it's not in the body. It's inside this cell. What these bugs will do then is break out of this, and they will virtually follow porins between adjacent cells and make their way into them, and they just keep spreading and spreading and spreading from tissue to tissue to tissue, hiding from the immune system until you get a massive breakdown of tissue. Then finally your immune system gets exposed, but by that time you have major damage to the lining of the intestine, especially the large intestine. And what do you usually die from? Could be, in this case, loss of blood or dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. So all those kinds of things. Okay, Yersinia. Down at the bottom, the last one on those facultative anaerobes, Yersinia. And Yersinia pestis. It's the only one I want you to know.
Where?
I'm down on facultative anaerobes again, on this sheet. I'm on this sheet. We're working our way down on this sheet. That facultative anaerobes group that we've been working our way through, the Enterobacteriaceae. And the last one down there under the family Enterobacteriaceae is Yersinia, spelled with a Y. And pestis. And the causative agent is plague, which you can call by a variety of names. You can call it bubonic plague, you can call it black plague, you can call it medieval plague, you can call it whatever you want to. What do you know about this? It actually used to be in a different genus. It used to be in the Pasteurella genus. But they took it out of here a couple of years ago because genetically it just looked different. They gave it its own genus. What do you know about the plague?
Killed off.
Killed off millions.
Okay.
I know it gave you a ring around, like a rosy ring around your black spot.
Okay, so we have, so that's why sometimes it was called the Black Plague, because you ended up with significant damage, hemorrhaging of capillary beds. And so it looked like severe bruising went on.
Wasn't it carried by mice or rats?
Okay, so who then is the reservoir?
The
rats. The rat's the reservoir.
It was the fleas.
And there was a vector. Vector meaning what?
Bug.
Typically some type of an arthropod, some type of insect or related kind of to the insects that was transferred the organism from the reservoir to anything else that would harbor the organism. And in the case of humans, it was devastating. A series of plagues went through Europe and northern Africa and as far east as China, starting in about the 11th century. And estimates are how many people died. Well, some people say as much as 2/3 of Europe died from all of that. What was associated with all of those deaths? So we know we have a rat, and we know we've got a vector, which is the flea. But why during these time periods? Obviously this bug has been around forever.
poor hygiene? Poor...
No, in this case,
Offered what they ate.
no, it had to do with commerce.
Like,
Oh,
Shipping.
shipping commerce.
Exactly right. So we start to sail all over the place. Now we're, North America, this continent doesn't fall into the picture yet, the first time, but there was an awful lot of commerce that came out of what is now Scandinavia, all the way down that western coast of Europe and Africa, all the way to the Middle East and as far as China. So we're spreading, and rats go where the boats go. So you just had to have a couple of infected rats who were bitten by the flea that contained the bacteria, had them on your boat, and your crew got sick, and then as soon as you got to port, the rats typically leave and go out and have fun on the wharf because they've been lonely. on board for all this stuff. But devastating disease. Gone today?
I don't think so.
No. You vaccinated for bubonic plague?
Maybe.
I think you were. But post 9/11, why did service people get vaccinated? For fear that what was going to happen? Bioterrorism. Somebody was going to use this bug in some type of a unique bomb form, and we were going to have cities devastated by people having the plague. So they came up with a vaccine very quickly, very quickly. And one of the problems with it is it caused a lot of people that were vaccinated to get sick, reacted strongly to the presence of the vaccine. So they backed off on that. So I don't know where, do you know where what the status is now with service people?
I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
gonna check my service records.
Yeah.
I'm vaccinated against anthrax
Yeah.
and smallpox.
It depends upon when you were vaccinated. Look it up. I'd be curious to know how you fit into that. Okay. Down at the bottom.
What's treatment?
Treatment is, it responds well to antibiotics. And this bug shows up all around the world all the time. There are cases of bubonic plague that happen in the United States every year. Most of them are in the Southwest, where it's not the rat that's the reservoir anymore, but it's a certain type of rodent.
Yeah.
A mouse-like rodent, or sometimes meadow voles are known to be carriers. So the reservoir has changed, but we still have cases all around the world and in the United States. So it's not like something that was medieval and we don't see anymore. Not the case at all. Within the family Pasteurelliaceae, then looking at the next family below that, Haemophilus influenzae. We need to talk about that. What do you know about Haemophilus influenzae? There are two forms. Most of you have probably been vaccinated for this. Hib, which stands for Haemophilus influenzae type B, because it's the type B, that serotype, which is associated with meningitis. The problem with it, look at the name again, Haemophilus influenzae. And you can see where there's going to be a conflict right off the bat, because now we got a bacterium that we're giving the name influenzae to, but we know that influenzas, type A and B and C and D and et cetera, are caused by a virus. So oftentimes when a parent hears that their child received the HIB, the Hib, and if they've got enough sense to ask, or they read the sheet and they see influenza, they think their child has gotten a flu shot, or that they have gotten a flu shot. So another type of meningitis. What was the other kind we saw? Viral meningitis. Did we see any other type of meningitis? Group B, beta hemolytic strep. These words ought to just flow off your tongue at this point. HIA, type A, everybody in this room has had it. And it usually causes some type of almost faking this intestinal flu stuff. So very common. This one, though, very dangerous. Who's most prone to come up with an HIB, Haemophilus influenzae type B infection? Little kids or the elderly. And it's always the same scenario. Okay, anybody got Gardnerella infection right now? Good. The bottom group down there, before we jump to the top of the page, the anaerobes. Just a quick comment about that. Bacteroides. See that at the very bottom of the page. Bacteroides. Fragilis, because it appears to be so fragile, these thin, delicate rods. Notice what it says. The dominant species in the intestine. and yet a cause of abdominal infections. This is the first organism that usually inhabits the colon. Not E. coli, it's usually Bacteroides. So it's the first one that you pick up after you were born. First one to florate your large intestine. And again, how does it make its way to the large intestine? It's got to go through the stomach. But what about the stomach of a neonate? We're not actively producing HCl yet. So it's easy to get things through very quickly. Okay, yes?
What's the difference between E. coli being fluoridated and infected?
You raise a good point. We have all kinds of pathogens as part of our normal flora, whether they're the bugs up our nose, or in our throat, on our skin, in our colon. Nasty pathogens. And we carry them around with us, but we don't get sick because of the competition involved. So we've got all these other hundreds upon hundreds of different species of bacteria and fungi, and even some protozoans, some skin mites. All of these guys are vying for the same food source. So with that competition going on, and plus each of these bacterium, interestingly enough, produces some kind of product. That was a great yawn.
Sorry.
If you had Ebola, you would have killed us all with that one.
No, only about 2/3, right?
Just about 2/3, exactly right. That each of these bacterium produces some type of a byproduct, waste product, call it whatever you want to, which functions as an antimicrobial. That's an important concept. Every species does this. So each species produces its own antimicrobial. To do what? To keep the bugs around it from getting to the food. So now you've got all these organisms all vying for the same nutrients that are in there, which are limiting, which means everybody can't have everything they want. So each of these organisms is producing something that's going to keep either the bug next to it from reproducing or just outright killing it. And you know, what's the difference between the two of those again? They're producing some type of a compound which is either cidal or static. But they're trying to maintain control over their nutrient site. And as long as that keen competition goes on all the time, we don't get sick from those bugs. It's when one organism becomes dominant over the others for whatever reason. And usually it can be what? The most simple one is you're taking some kind of antibiotic. Or you've picked up an antimicrobial, antibiotic / whatever you want to call it, from contaminated something. A food source that just got loaded with this stuff, whatever it happens to be. And then one bug takes over and becomes the dominant form. So there's always this battle that's going on, always the battle. For that reason, the question is always raised, should you use antibacterial soap on your skin?
It's not gonna.
You know, we got this paranoia about, God, there are bacteria on me, I gotta kill them all off. You know, you can't do that and you don't want to do that. So have we actually created more of a problem by using antibacterial soaps all the time because it disrupts our normal flora? Why do we end up with all these skin infections, these irritations, all that kind of stuff? Why do we end up with so many people with bad bowels? Is it the food we eat? Is it disruption of, it's all those factors put together. And on that note, let's get out of here for 10. Okay, take 15.
Can I ask you a question?
Everybody, please get some coffee.
Dr. Manning, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at my list. So you like basically did the.
No, what we're saying is we're getting away from that.
No, I'm talking about the ones we've already talked about.
Yeah, but I'm saying don't use that list there
I've used this list.
Simply, as soon as you see brand name, then use these.
But what I'm saying is, we talked about this one, the E. coli.
Sure.
Coli, Enterobacter, this one.
No, didn't talk about Enterobacter. We just said that these are all Enterobacteriaceae. They're all in that family.
So I can
We're done, we're done.
And then Shigella, Salmonella.
Salmonella.
This one,
Yersinia,
this one.
and then we talked about Haemophilus,
And then this one.
and then Bacteroides.
So those are the ones we need to-
And remember that Bacteroides now falls out of the fermenters
Yeah. It's
and falls into its
It's
anaerobe.
an anaerobe.
So all we have to do to finish, which we'll do when we come back, is this group at the top.
So it's just
So we're done for the day.
Just these four.
That, yeah.
The only like
What's his
kind of
name?
novel ones I have are polio, smallpox,
Pneumococci, yep.
and
Expensive.
anthrax. All
Yep.
those are
So you'll probably.
common, I think. Except for JED, but I didn't actually get that. That's only required like for
So
people in the
you didn't
Philippines
get,
and
you
stuff.
didn't get it then? You probably ought to be thankful, because it was kind of a dangerous vaccine.
Really?
Yeah. It came off the market way too fast.
Yeah. When did that come out? Do you know?
Within a year after 9/11.
Okay, because I went in there.
Yeah.
Probably figured it out
By
then.
then, they weren't doing it anymore.
Yeah,
It was too
military's
much
slow
of a
in that though. Like their malarial pills have been causing a lot of issues, and
Yeah. And
they haven't even stopped it yet.
one of the things that's interesting with the military is oftentimes they will get drugs that have not completed the FDA.
Pretty damn trials.
Yep, they do.
You guys are all welcome.
Good trial group right there. Sorry, can't say no.
I've seen a lot of advertising.
What do you think of these?
It's at. How do you feel about that?
I'm one to say that if you don't have a problem, you shouldn't be doing it. It's a waste of your money. So if you do have an intestinal problem,
Like, is that going to do anything for
if
you?
you've got, no. If your floor is in good shape already, why keep adding new bugs to it?
Well, if it isn't in the best of shape, is it going to help
if you
keep
have
this
sloppy
probiotic yogurt? Or
If you have sloppy bowel syndrome, or you've got even Crohn's, in some cases, they're saying that these probiotics may help you. But if you're normal and healthy, it's this idea that I can make myself feel even better if I eat this yogurt. And it's a waste of time and money. The yogurt tastes good and you enjoy it.
It's different than what it is. Like, did you know, like, ice cream, they take mashed potatoes to, like, keep the form. Yeah, instead of it melting. I love jokes. But it looks a lot the same, doesn't it? Like, I guess they add, like, different colors to it, but so it can stay in the smell. I'm like, so what else do they use for meat? I love it. I'm like, it's so
It's nice that I have G-Roll now too, so I can like.
Have they used? No.
I watch the Disney Channel because Billy's around and it's
Like, there's a good chance that I will watch Girl.
Yeah, I'll get ready to look at it.
Girl,
But then what I'm gonna do for my paper too is like.
On my own,
looking at,
like-
friends that are taking my
Just
trip.
to see, because I saw like a preview for it, and it was like, poor man, his dad, and I was like squealing because I was watching.
Ask my dad, he has like a science, and I'm sure he knows how to ride a bike.
It's just.
I'm laying back down. I said, get up, you know where So they're like,
No, you don't have to wear
live
it.
stream and images, like,
Or somebody
or
who
just
just
Yeah, we should just go after lecture. These are like hundreds. I didn't think about that.
They're creepy. I watch one anyway.
When is our, and then like as soon as November 3rd
Yeah, so the second is something that was red face from crying, and we make them stand in line for an hour. That's how I would.
You know what, I might just go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I would do it Sunday. Yeah, you don't have to go.
Maybe not.
Really? You were doing the press before, but you just don't get it.
Because you didn't make it. Did you do a little? I studied. I did all my tests. I read a lot.
I was just, I would not want to be like a fast time. Some of the first ones I got 3, but this one I got 1. Well, hopefully it'll like that was really nice out. It's probably a long day. I had to work. I was told like, it hurts my ears almost reading it. Oh, your ears. I hate that.
My church knows I'm a hot mess.
My chest.
Actually, I like.
Yeah, but then we just sit there for an exam. Oh, wait. Tactics. I said it's from 5:30 or 5:15 to 8:15.
Yeah.
Like I said in class last week, every exam you take, the girl has a duration of lecture. So, the duration of the
Literally.
exam, it's going to be the duration of the lecture. But you leave after you finish.
Yeah, when you're done, you're done. I wonder.
Everybody's so worried.
Why would you not show up for the final day? Or would you only
I always just feel good when I personally ask a question and then he goes on. And I'm like, where's the stuff?
Oh, no, that's different, but I mean, like. Yeah, it's not your fault if he goes off on putting a spiel. But it's when you ask a question, he goes off on a spiel, and then sometimes I would ask the exact same.
And you're like, I just said that.
Because they always say, more time.
Trip.
Here goes the Philippians.
This smells good on this.
I just don't, like, I don't feel like they're all like, I've actually learned.
Like I said, literally the only thing I've learned is that snoring is evolution.
It's really, it's the same thing.
It's literally the same thing every day.
It is. If you understand the interactions, yeah. I remember. And then it has to attach, interaction and attach.
You have to special people,
You know, bring the thing in, they have some cheap days on.
but that's all the stuff.
That's
you
always
learn.
something, yeah, like if you've taken a psych test or an HA, you're completely new to it. Okay. What confuses me is with my 3 lectures left, he gave us all the tests that he was gonna go questions on the final exam.
Do we need any?
Yeah, where you have.
No, well, that's really.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, it goes through what, like chapter 5 or something. I really want to go like through the book.
Right.
That's what he-
Everything's not.
Yeah, the first couple chapters.
Which is not lifespan development, that is.
No, that's
childhood
that's
development.
the first couple chapters.
So you mentioned you said before, but you got a level 3.
So what do you guys have?
Stuff like that is all.
Yeah.
We'll have like 70 days after you take the test. It's just
Yeah, but we just have to do it the same day. So it's probably due next Thursday or Friday. No, I mean this Thursday or Friday.
It's like 7 days after you take it.
Okay, we're talking today. I have a babysitter until 4:30.
Were you there? Did you get the typed out stuff that they're
No, that's what they do. Like I have to set my notes.
Did you just leave it?
Yeah, because there's no way you can go back and check. So that's what I'm gonna do today. Today I will take my test. Today I will do my focus review as I'm taking my test.
I feel like I need to write it down.
Yeah. Go to the damn computer lab.
Is that where these questions are going? These are the ones that are out.
Well, I figure I'm gonna fail the med search test the first time I take it. I usually fail my test. the first
So I
time
figured
and then
I've missed 2
I'll have
classes.
to get,
Well, that's a job, it's 2 classes.
right on track. That's everybody.
So
Everybody is
and knowing me, I'll probably do it.
I mean, and not even that, it's just,
Each semester is
It's not like somebody I just want to do Thursday. Right, right. I just was there earlier. Like Joe. I wouldn't even get
the money questions are gonna be like,
True false.
oh, one of the short answer, but
What you got, Neil?
Well, I think the only short answer is the questions that we already have.
From Easter.
which I didn't remember.
Yeah, they're not terrible. I think I put them in the card form.
Oh, yeah, there's something I haven't said.
Question on
Even if it's like having a conversation with somebody or something, I don't have the brain.
I wish I would have Kevin here.
I don't, you know? And stuff like, everyone's like, they say everything, you know? I have a filter.
Uh-oh,
So just imagine the shit that I say.
Oh,
You
sorry.
know what I mean? There's stuff in there, I don't want you to know how crazy I am. Right, I thought they were gonna roll with it. I was like, nervous with my baby.
I can't have
I want her to be crazy like me or something.
Yeah.
You know what? All of our are like. I'll actually get around.
Get any sleep?
I take them on my But with my granny's last,
I don't know. It kind of sounds like you don't have lab today. We get
My granny used to that really does. He is, I think she had him last time I saw her. There wasn't quite, that's how she looks. It wasn't
There's so
screaming
many
last
movies
night, but like,
now, 2 days a
every
week,
time
like,
I
I have to be there before.
and this is how I can feel like. I mean, like,
Yeah.
Potentially there could be a ring around the
you
neighborhood.
know what, we have to be
Not
not
sensitive.
So I'm running out of
So that's why you have to use those measurements.
Sitting there like,
Which, I mean, I did write down, like, the negative issues. So yeah, you need to use the paper that tells you if it's less than 14 millimeters, it's not sensitive. If it's in between, and if we go to one measure, well, I there's no place in there. I just need to build a separate.
this is how it came out on the border. They said that until they said, put them
No, he said
it was one of those things. He's just, I would never try.
so yeah, I put them on, he never did come on. And then he came down.
He's like, love my life.
I got 4
Ugly.
to see what you
Insurance and then away to my one day
If you've read it and you're done, yeah, I don't know. Everybody's got another different
But I mean, like, if they.
Are you actually looking for someone else? Yeah.
If I was trying to bring those kind of.
Okay, did you measure the range?
I did not. I didn't.
Yes, we have to go back to that sheet. You find out whether it's intermediate or something. Well, if we would, let's take a look at it.
And then if you got the second two,
I don't know. We're
Okay. Okie dokie. What was that? What was that? Open your mouth. Oh. I just wanted to see what it was.
So Dr. Rosh,
Yeah.
you're saying if we've done everything we need to do with our dishes, we don't have to go to lab?
If you're done and you've got your results,
Got all the results.
okay, you're done.
Cool.
Finito. Write me a good paper.
All right, I'll write you a book.
Do we need to get rid of our dishes or plates?
Everything's got to be out of your drawers if you're done.
I noticed that.
You know, there, just as a, to repeat that again, some of you, if you found out you had Staphylococcus aureus, you wanted to go the one step beyond to find out whether or not you were MRSA positive. We can do that in a day. So, I mean, that's up to you, and that information is shared with no one but you. So if you'd just like to know if you're colonized. But again, that's if your end result was Staphylococcus aureus. Like, so, but otherwise, you know, if you're done, you're done. Write me a good paper. Write yourself a good paper, not me.
So you're saying that if we're not doing that, we don't have to put a lab for you?
How can I put that in other words? If you're done, Sam, you're done.
Well, you told me that last week, but you said after this lab.
Yeah, I was going to do one more, but it's not. I'm not going to.
Okay.
So we'll just finish it out. You raised a good point because I did say that.
Yeah, I was just clarifying.
Yeah. Okay. One thing we didn't mention: why do we feed cattle so much antibiotic?
Because they're standing in their own poop.
Good guess. Anybody know? Animals tend to grow faster when they're given antibiotics, but the reason is that cows are not normally, they don't eat corn. And yet, you know, you see advertisements for corn-fed beef all the time. Cows don't eat corn, and they've got these series of delicate stomachs, cows do. They have a multiple stomach type of effect. And if they eat corn, the simple crunching up on that dry corn those little shards of corn turn into like little razors, and they just slice the heck out of the walls of the stomach of the cow. So they give them these massive doses of antibiotic to keep down the infection rate in the stomach, because they're feeding them corn, which cows don't even like.
Why do they do
Because it produces a bigger beef than grazing cattle. It's compact amount, high amount of nutrients. So that's why they do it. And so that's why the use of antibiotics. And then they use antibiotics in chickens as well for a couple of reasons. One is if you've got a $405,000 facility and you cram 1 million chickens into that, you got one sick chicken, obviously everybody dies. So they provide antibiotics for them all. But it also puts on weight quickly. I don't quite understand why that's the case. Whether it's that the organism is not spending time building the antibodies to fight off disease and therefore has more energy to exert to its own meat. Don't know. But more than half of all the antibiotics produced in the world go into animal feed. And the majority of that then goes right out the other end and it's lying around the environment. So you'll be dead by the time you're 70.
Is antibiotics for animals different?
Please?
Like, do the antibiotics that we give animals in situations
No,
like that?
same stuff.
The exact same
Yeah,
stuff as what we
it's
do?
modified in many cases, but it's basically the same. Loads of amoxicillin and Cipro kind of drugs. Hello? If you don't know how to use that dumb phone, then don't use it. Yeah. Those things have become, they're like, I think that someone has put those out to slowly take over everybody's brain.
Oh, for sure.
And everybody's behavior has changed, if you notice that. Everybody's behavior. There was a thing on NPR this morning talking about how parents ignore their children because the kid's trying to get the attention and the parent is constantly doing this. And the kids are on their, and they wonder why so many kids have ADD, because they're bonkers out of shape because they can't get their parents' attention. Parents ignore them because they're doing that all the time. So, just want to warn you, and look at them all, they're everywhere, right? They're taking over your brain. Okay.
Do you have a cell phone?
It's in my car, and I leave it off all the time. The only reason I carry it is because if I break down, I want to have somebody to call.
Yeah, a lot of older guys are like.
I don't want anybody calling me to just go, I'm in the Kroger shopping, what are you doing?
When does this get on start?
My daddy has two.
Does anybody have anyone that calls them and says that?
Well, the people that are in line in front of me in the grocery store spend an awful lot of time going, whoa, yeah, man. Yeah.
You must go to Whole Foods.
It's because it's easier than text messages.
Okay. Who stole my sheet? Okay, let's finish this off here. We'll get you out a little earlier today. Jump way up to the top of the sheet. This sheet is the one we're working with. Jawohl. Last group of the rods. This is it. And then we're going to move into curve forms next week and we're done. Aerobes. Out of that group of aerobes, are there any there that you recognize? Yes. Pseudomonas, absolutely. Tell me why you know something about Pseudomonas.
Because my brother has CF and they carry Pseudomonas.
Exactly. And this is a relatively new finding, probably within the past 6 to 8 years. Go ahead.
Is that the one that they all have different strands of
Yes.
Pseudomonas?
Yes. So Pseudomonas, where we used to have a problem, and students used to talk about it all the time when they used to go to Shriners. We don't do that anymore, right? Is the Shriners even open?
Yes, it is.
Okay. But we used to send students over there all the time. They'd come back and go, my patient had a Pseudomonas infection. And their skin was kind of, where it was burned, was kind of green-yellow. And that's the first indication that you got a Pseudomonas infection. For some reason, it loved burned skin. And the reason the skin would turn colors is it produces a soluble, water-soluble pigment. And the skin would change color. But it kept the healing process from going on, and it was a major problem. They were always fighting Pseudomonas infections over there. Where do we have problems with it today? It's an opportunistic pathogen which means that as it would with a burn patient, so you've got this major portal of entry, it just shows up in a variety of places where you don't expect it. Oftentimes, along with Staphylococcus aureus, it will show up, especially with hip and knee replacements and all of that stuff. It proves to be kind of a secondary infectant after staph, yeah.
Opportunistic pathogen.
What does that mean?
I would think every pathogen would be opportunistic.
No, some of them are just outright pathogens, which means that those organisms have to be in a host in order to survive. And Pseudomonas can grow on a whole variety of things. It shows up here, there, and everywhere, sometimes in old bread. But if it has the opportunity to find a portal of entry into human, it will. You raise a good point that you would think anyone would be, but no, this bug can live outside a warm body and do quite well. What?
So why is it first, I mean, why do they see it in surgical wounds and burns? Is it just because it lives on the skin and it gets in?
There is something about that wounded tissue that allows that organism to colonize and grow there. And for some reason, burned tissue, there's something released in the tissue. And you know, there are all of these, anytime the tissue is damaged, you get all these damaged cells dumping out histamines and histones and this kind of pheromone and that kind of pheromone. Something triggers that and it goes, I want to be here with this. We don't know what that is. The same way with CF patients. It was found that with cystic fibrosis patients, that mucoidal buildup in the lungs harbors Pseudomonas organisms. And they grow this biofilm. They all kind of grow together in this slimy kind of mass, which just makes treatment of the CF patient even more difficult. And oftentimes, it doesn't respond well to antibiotics. Is there anything else you want to share with that?
Usually gets pink line,
Yep,
steroids.
yep,
Instead of antibiotics.
yep. Difficult to treat, and largely because of the biofilm.
That's usually when he goes in for like a clean out.
Yep, exactly.
Cleans.
When the organisms gather together in a biofilm, and this is one of those organisms, interestingly enough, that it's kind of fascinating. So here is, let's say, an alveolar duct, and here's a set of alveoli. And you've got this mucoidal mass built up in here, and then this sheath, a biofilm of these organisms grows on top of that or in that, making it difficult sometimes even to aspirate that stuff out of there, is that they will take in the antibiotic and in the biofilm will, and they'll process it and spit it out on the other side. So depending upon the antibiotic used, they'll actually receive the antibiotic, but then go, wait a minute, this stuff's killing us, and turn right around and exocytose the stuff. So it's a fascinating little bug. We didn't pay much attention to it for a long time, and now we realize it shows up in all kinds of ways. Let's not do brucella. Let's not do, anybody got rabbit fever? Okay, good. Bordetella pertussis. Now, if you got an animal, you hear about kennel cough all the time, which is also Bordetella, but it's a different species. Takes us all the way back. Remember we did this? This vaccine, diphtheria, and what did we use for diphtheria? What was it? We used a diphtheria toxoid, remember? And what is a toxoid? It's an attenuated toxin. It's an altered toxin, which still elicits what? An immune response, but doesn't cause the disease. What do we find with tetanus? Toxoid. But what about this AP thing? Acellular is what the A stands for. Because initially with Bordetella pertussis, the causative agent for whooping cough, they used to kill the cells and add them to the vaccine. But there were always, even in the killing process, it was usually done by heat, there were a few cells that survived. And what happened with a couple of batches of vaccine going back about, 15, 20 years ago, is that a couple of children got pertussis from the vaccine. And in getting the pertussis from the vaccine, of course, what was the word that went out by word of mouth through the community?
You get the vaccine, you get.
Exactly, you're gonna get whooping cough from the vaccine. So then parents did what?
They stopped vaccinating
They stopped
kids.
having their kids vaccinated at all. And then for a while there, we dropped the P and you simply got your what? Your DT. And then the cases of whooping cough skyrocketed again. And what did they do then but put the vaccine back together again using an acellular, meaning it doesn't even have a complete cell. It is a genetically manipulated set of proteins that are commonly found in the cell wall of the bacterium. And for that reason, it's called acellular pertussis. So oftentimes now we abbreviate that as what? DTaP. But what is it? Toxoid. This is an acellular, which means it just contains a couple of proteins, significant proteins, typical of the bacterium, which still elicit an immune response. Not anywhere as close to the strong response we got from killed cells, but it still works relatively well. Yep.
So you have your DTaP, and when you have your Tdap with is the Tdap's with the lowercase d, right?
No,
Is that
no.
without the toxoid?
No,
Like,
it's
what's the
simply,
difference between the two?
that gets very confusing, but when they start to do, as opposed to DTaP, they do Tdap. All they're doing is varying the concentration of the toxoids.
Of what's in most.
Okay, so it's the concentration of the toxoid that's found in the vaccine that determines what the first letter is. Yep.
So the acellular pertussis is not pertussis, it's just kind of similar?
What they've done is mimicked, they've genetically analyzed the organism and they know certain proteins are found in the cell wall, unique to this particular bacteria. What they've done in the lab, genetic engineering, is we recreate that set of proteins. So there is no bacterial cell there. All we're doing is making these proteins, which are very similar to those that would be found in the cell wall of the bacterium. And that's what still elicits some kind of an antibody response, but it is no ways as strong as the other. That is poor sentence structure. At the same time, it doesn't elicit a titer, long-term titer. And you see there are still pockets of pertussis that break out where people have been vaccinated. Kids have already been vaccinated for it, and they still get pertussis. And that part of it is back to this acellular pertussis to a large extent.
You just did a
And much of this came from parents by word of mouth. Do not let your kid get vaccinated. And kids died because they came down with diphtheria and tetanus and all the rest of that crap from this stuff. Kind of rarity, but kids still died from it all.
What would be the reason to change like the concentration of the
Because it has something to do with titer over time. That your diphtheria titer usually remains high for a significant period of time, and then we're more concerned about tetanus.
Gotcha. Because that's what we got.
The Tdaps.
Here is the Tdap.
Yeah, and that's probably the most common issuance right now. Yeah.
For adults, they do DTaP.
Yeah. For kids, they still do DTaP.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in case like I had gotten the pertussis vaccine and then I got it, does that mean that
You didn't get it from the vaccine.
No, I didn't get it from the vaccine. I
No.
got it from somebody at the hospital.
Sure.
Anyway, so does that mean that now that I've had it and had the vaccine, am I more likely to?
Your titer should be so high, your chance of getting it again are next to nil.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Is
Yeah.
my titer going to
Yeah.
be super high?
Yeah. What was
She's
that?
gonna get that 1 in a million chance.
Yep,
Yeah.
but you never know.
Yeah, it could be the next
In the
one.
sciences, what? We say this all the time. In the sciences, never say never and never say always.
Right.
Never.
I could be
Never.
typhoid
You just said that.
whooping cough if you're giving the talk of you guys.
Yes, dear.
So what determines someone's like tighter length? You feel me? Because I'm asking because I've maxed out on my hepatitis and it just doesn't stay long. So I
Yeah.
have a card saying like, listen,
Yeah.
she's had as much hepatitis vaccine as you can get.
Yeah.
It's just not gonna be there.
Mhm.
So what determines that?
Means you're a mutant.
Oh, really?
There's for some reason, your immune system does not respond to the presence of that antigen and doesn't have a memory for it. It's really what it amounts to. And there's something with you that just says that. There's always a couple of people who can't maintain a titer for hep and stuff like that. They just can't. And there's probably nothing that's going to change that. Probably nothing. Last one, Legionella. Tell me all you know about Legionella. Obviously, the disease is called Legionnaire's disease. What's the history behind this? It's kind of a funny but interesting history.
It was I just know the background, there was some kind of convention and all these Legionnaires were there.
Legionnaires, okay.
And it was in a hotel and everybody got like really, really sick.
Yeah.
It
Who
was
are the
airborne.
Legionnaires first?
The-
That's the beginning of the French Foreign Legion.
They were American legions from the they were in the War of Independence, right? I don't know.
Legionnaires are simply a group of veterans that get together and have conventions and drink a lot of beer. They have a great time. Anyway, back in 1970s,
76 is that.
don't remember the exact date, there was a convention in Philadelphia, and after the convention, many of them came down with respiratory infections. A bunch of people died, and they couldn't track it down, they couldn't identify the organism. And the CDC worked at it for months until they finally identified this particular bacillus, which no one had ever seen before. And they traced it back to the air conditioning system. And they found out that the organism was growing in the ethylene glycol. What is that stuff? Ethylene glycol? It's a coolant. Right. Same stuff you put in the, basically it's similar to what you put in the radiator in your car, because it absorbs a tremendous amount of heat and so on and so on. And the organisms were growing quite well, and why not? Ethylene glycol, glycogen, you know, it's a derivative, it's an organic compound. You're always going to find some bacteria that can grow in an organic compound no matter what it is. But these bugs were growing quite well in that stuff, and there were leaks in the system, and it got aerosoled into people's rooms. And of course, they sucked it in and came down with this unique type of pneumonia. And again, the organism took a while to be discovered, brand new organism no one had seen before. It didn't mean it was new, but no one had ever identified it before, and the CDC finally came up with it. What's the status of that today?
Didn't they change it?
No, actually, it's quite common. And there are outbreaks of Legionnaire's disease that occur all the time, most of them in nursing homes.
They're just like old people?
Good guess, good guess, good. One is that, again, the ventilation system usually leaves something, but most of them get them from taking showers.
So don't take showers.
No.
It's the steam.
What they do in nursing homes, they turn the water temperature down so they don't get scalded when they take showers.
Okay.
And the bacterium grows well in PVC, which means what? Polyvinyl chloride, which is the plastic piping that they put in all the time. So now you turn the temperature down in the water. The organism makes its way in, however, grows in a microfilm along these plastic pipes, and then in turn, you get this 90-year-old poor person sitting on a little chair in the shower room, and the water only gets tepidly warm. And they sit there and inhale all of that aerosol water that comes out of there, and they come down with pneumonia and die. And there are outbreaks of Legionnaires that occur all the time. But I would guess in Ohio that at least half, if not more of them, have all been associated with nursing homes. One of the other places it is found is in those misters that you find in the grocery store over the vegetables.
Oh, God.
Which the Board of Health maintains very strict rules and guidelines saying that those systems have to be flushed with bleach on a regular basis. Otherwise, the same thing. Those plastic tubing provides great growth for Legionnaires, bacillus, and you happen to have your head under there looking for the right head of lettuce, and you get misted. You get a snoot full of the stuff, and you wonder where it came from. Yeah.
Now, if the nursing homes were to turn the water heater up like once every 2 weeks or something, just blast the pipes, would that kill it?
I don't know what the regimen is now for this. It was my assumption that they added something to the water tank and flushed the system with it, some kind of an antimicrobial agent to just flush the piping with it, which is the same thing they do in like your Kroger store. They're supposed to do. And again, who does that? Who flushes those little tubes, those water tubes?
Somebody.
So the person in charge of the veggies. I often wonder,
Are they really getting done?
or do they go, I'll just put my initials on here and say I did it.
Oh, gosh.
Again, the adage goes back to trust no one. What you want to do is be careful that when you keep your face out of the mister when you go there. Eating the food that's been sprayed is not a problem. It's the aerosoling into the lungs that causes the problem.
So how do they go about knowing what this is? I mean, just because you end up getting pneumonia and whatever, and it happens to a lot, like old people. So they probably just roll out old person got pneumonia.
And in most cases, they never determine what the causative agent was. It's when you have a cluster of people coming down with pneumonia, something's wrong. I mean, old folks die of pneumonia all the time.
Right.
And it's usually a complication from this, that, or whatever. And we don't do an autopsy, we don't do tissue sampling, don't do any of that stuff. We just say the person had this, like that.
I often see tests done on stool for Shigella and Legionella.
Exactly.
So it's not always the aerosol thing, it's something that you ingest through your diet?
Well, wait a minute, we're jumping here. So you're going back to Shigella again?
Yeah, Shigella with the Legionella. I guess they're trying to determine what the causative agent is of this.
Yeah, Legionella, so they're doing stool sample testing for Legionella. You hack up enough of that stuff and swallow it. Okay. Hack and swallow. It would show up there too, that would make sense. But you get a better sample from a sputum sample out of that. But that doesn't surprise me that they wouldn't do that as well. It's easy, if you're taking that sample anyhow, let's just check for the presence of that bug. And what numbers are they looking for there with that test? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
No.
So is it transmitted from person to person or just?
Either way, it can be transferred from somebody hacking, coughing, and hacking on the aerosoling the bug out there, droplet form we call that.
Yeah.
Or you can get it from contaminated water, air conditioning systems, all of that stuff.
Well, if the nasty water is spraying down on your fruit and you don't wash the fruit, can you do it that way?
No, because it tends not to live through the stomach. It's an opportunistic pathogen again, which means that it's made its way into us one way or another. It is not typically associated with gastrointestinal problems. We oftentimes just think of it as being not to say that it can't be. Any of these bugs can show up someplace where you would least expect them and cause a problem. And sometimes we never find out what caused the problem. So it's tough to call, but basically it likes the lungs. There's something about that lining of the lungs that allows them to attach and again form these biofilms. There was another hand.
Yeah, I had a question. You were talking about the shower system, the heat, water heater and all that. What are these bacteria eating in clean water?
Well, it's not the water they're feeding on, it's the plastic piping.
They're
Or-
feeding on the plastic.
Yeah, plastics come from oil. They're petroleum-based. Loads of organic compounds in there. These organisms can take apart the inner lining of that and find loads of carbohydrates. Not a problem. Not a problem. So what did you know, with plastic, that's always bothered me with drinking bottles, where you fill the same bottle up over and over and over again, and you always get that backwash in there. And so you can have bacteria that will live on that plastic with no problem at all. Not a bit of a problem. They can grow quite well.
Right.
So and it's not the fact that we want to shy away and say, I don't want to be exposed to any bacteria. It's important that we are, right?
Right.
It stimulates the immune system all the time. It's an important thing to be exposed. But there are times when you go, this may be overexposure. And so you just be leery of all of that. There's one other hand up, yeah.
So is it better to use that metal cup then versus that?
No, this is just handier. I got a plastic one too. And all I do with this one as well though is that because the lining is not metal, the lining is plastic, is that I pour boiling hot water into it. And I leave it in there for about 10 minutes every morning after I've washed it the night before. So it's heated in the first place, and then I put my hot coffee in there after I dump it. Last question.
Yes, with the Legionella, wouldn't you be able to find it in like, I don't know, hairspray bottles? Oh, since it's an aerosol.
I've never heard of that before. Usually,
Because I can just picture it, this big convention, everybody's doing their hair, spraying it, like,
Yeah.
all that hairspray.
but most hairsprays contain alcohol. And that long-term exposure, I think, I don't know if anybody's ever done a study on that. You raise a great question. I don't have an answer for that. But I would assume that there is some type of an antimicrobial agent in those to begin with, and it's probably the alcohol. But what else is in hairspray? I don't know what's in that stuff.
I know there's
What is it?
alcohol in it.
I mean, what is it that makes your hair kind of water?
Poisonous stuff.
Yeah, so if you don't want to do it.
I don't know what's in there that makes hair stand on end. Okay, enough for today. Enough for today.
So, I have a question about my so I got my readings and I was susceptible. So does that mean I have to do any more tests?
If you know what your species is, no, then you're done.
Okay, so this is what I've done.
Well, you can talk about the one that I said, like, the American.
And then I so am I positive?
What have you learned?